The morning Theresa Zimmerman turned 21. She learned her father had gambled away their ranch and promised her hand in marriage to settle the debt. She stood in the kitchen of their modest homestead just outside Presidio, Texas, watching the sun rise over the Rio Grande, when her father delivered the news with a whiskey bottle still clutched in his trembling hands. The year was 1883, and the frontier town sat on the edge of civilization, where the rules of civilized society often bent to accommodate desperation and greed. "You will marry Vincent Hargrove in 3 days," her father said, unable to meet her eyes. "He owns the bank, the general store, half the cattle operations in the county. He agreed to forgive the debt and give us enough to start fresh in California." Theresa felt her world crumble. Vincent Hargrove was 53 years old, a widower who had buried 2 wives already. Rumors swirled through Presidio about how those women had died. Whispers of cruelty and violence that people spoke only when they thought no one was listening. She had seen the way he looked at her when she came to town, his eyes possessive and cold, as if she were a horse he was considering purchasing. "Papa, you cannot do this," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please, there has to be another way." "There is no other way," he said, finally meeting her gaze. His eyes were bloodshot and filled with shame, but also with a stubborn resignation. "The papers are already signed. The announcement has been made. If you refuse, Hargrove will take everything and we will be destitute. Your mother's grave is on this land, Theresa. Would you have them move her bones when the bank takes possession?" She wanted to scream, to rage against the injustice of being traded like property to pay for her father's mistakes. But she knew the reality of their situation. Women had few rights, fewer options. Her father's gambling had been getting worse since her mother died 3 years ago, and she had tried to hold their small ranch together with her own labor and determination. Now it was all for nothing. 3 days, she repeated numbly. Her father nodded and shuffled out of the kitchen, leaving her alone with the morning light streaming through the windows. Theresa sank into a chair, her hands shaking. She had always imagined falling in love, marrying a man she chose, building a life based on mutual respect and affection. Now that dream was being ripped away, replaced by a nightmare of forced obligation to a man she feared and despised. She spent the rest of the morning mechanically going through her chores, feeding the chickens, tending the small vegetable garden, trying to lose herself in familiar routines. But her mind kept returning to Vincent Hargrove's cruel smile, the way his fingers had lingered too long on her hand when he helped her down from a wagon last month, the bruises she had seen on his second wife's arms before she died of what the doctor called a fall down the stairs. By afternoon, she rode into town, desperate to find some way out of this trap. Presidio was a dusty collection of buildings clustered near the river, surrounded by the harsh beauty of the Chihuahuan desert. She tied her horse outside the general store and walked through the streets, feeling eyes on her. News had spread fast. People already knew she was to become Mrs. Vincent Hargrove. "Congratulations on your upcoming nuptials," Mrs. Patterson said as Theresa passed the mercantile. The older woman's voice was falsely cheerful, but her eyes held pity. Theresa forced a smile and kept walking. She made her way to the small church at the edge of town, where Reverend Mills was sweeping the front steps. He was a kind man, relatively new to Presidio, and she hoped he might offer some counsel or help. "Reverend," she called out, "might I speak with you?" He set aside his broom and gestured for her to enter the church. Inside, the cool darkness was a relief from the harsh Texas sun. They sat in a front pew, and Theresa poured out the whole story, her voice cracking with desperation. "Is there nothing that can be done?" she asked when she finished. "Some legal recourse? Can the church intervene?" Reverend Mills looked genuinely troubled. "I am sorry, Miss Zimmerman. I wish I could tell you otherwise, but the contract your father signed is legally binding, and I have no authority to prevent a lawful marriage, even one I might personally question." He hesitated. "I have heard things about Mr. Hargrove that concern me greatly. But without proof of wrongdoing, my hands are tied." Theresa felt tears sting her eyes but refused to let them fall. "So I am to be sacrificed to save my father from his own weakness." "I will pray for you," the Reverend said gently, "and I will watch over your welfare as best I can. If you ever need sanctuary, the church doors are always open." It was small comfort, but it was something. Theresa thanked him and left, feeling more hopeless than before. She was mounting her horse when she heard a familiar voice call her name. "Theresa, wait." She turned to see her childhood friend Clara running toward her, skirts lifted to keep from tripping. Clara worked at the hotel as a maid and always seemed to know everything happening in Presidio. "I heard about the engagement," Clara said breathlessly when she reached Theresa. "I cannot believe your father would do such a thing." "He had little choice," Theresa said bitterly, "or so he tells himself." Clara glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then lowered her voice. "There is someone you should know about. A cowboy who works the cattle drives between here and Fort Davis. His name is Yates Irving. He was here a few months back, and I saw the way he looked at you when you walked by. He asked me about you, wanted to know if you were spoken for." Theresa frowned, trying to remember. She had vague recollections of a tall, lean man with sun-darkened skin and serious gray eyes, but she had been too preoccupied with keeping the ranch running to pay much attention to strangers passing through. "What good does that do me now?" she asked. "He is due back in town tomorrow," Clara said urgently. "He has been working a spread up near Fort Davis, but he always comes through Presidio on his way to deliver cattle in Mexico. Maybe he could help somehow. Maybe he could take you away from here before the wedding." It sounded like a fantasy, a desperate hope with no basis in reality, but Theresa found herself clinging to it anyway. "Even if he was interested in me months ago, why would he risk himself for a stranger? Vincent Hargrove is a powerful man. Anyone who crosses him would make a dangerous enemy." "Just talk to him," Clara urged. "What do you have to lose? He will be staying at the hotel tomorrow night. I can arrange for you to meet him privately." Theresa hesitated, but the alternative was marriage to Vincent Hargrove in 3 days. "All right," she said finally. "Arrange it." The next day passed in agonizing slowness. Theresa went through the motions of her daily work, while her father avoided her, hiding in his room with his bottles. She tried to form a plan, but her mind kept spinning in fruitless circles. Even if this Yates Irving was willing to help her, what could he realistically do? Challenge Vincent Hargrove to a duel, steal her away in the night like some outlaw. Both scenarios seemed more likely to end in bloodshed than freedom. As evening approached, she changed into her one good dress, a simple blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. She told her father she was going to Clara's for the evening, and he barely acknowledged her, too deep in his cups to care. She rode into town as the sun was setting, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and crimson. Clara met her at the back entrance of the hotel and led her up a narrow staircase to the second floor. "He is in room 7, she whispered. "I told him a lady needed to speak with him on an urgent matter. He seemed intrigued." Theresa's heart pounded as she approached the door. She knocked softly, and a moment later it opened to reveal a man who took her breath away. Yates Irving stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and a lean, muscular build earned from years of hard labor. His face was angular and weathered, with those striking gray eyes she remembered, but there was a gentleness in his expression that surprised her. He wore simple cowboy gear, dusty from travel, but carried himself with quiet confidence. "Miss," he said, his voice a deep rumble, "please come in. Your friend said you needed help." She entered the small room, suddenly aware of the impropriety of being alone with a man in his hotel room. But desperation had pushed aside concerns about reputation. If she married Vincent Hargrove, her reputation would be the least of her worries. "My name is Theresa Zimmerman," she began, clasping her hands to keep them from shaking. "I do not know if you remember me." "I remember you," Yates said quietly. "I asked about you last time I was in town. You were at the mercantile buying supplies. You smiled at a little boy who was crying, and you gave him a peppermint stick from your own purchase. It made him laugh." Theresa was surprised he had noticed such a small moment. "I am in terrible trouble," she said, deciding to be direct. "In 2 days, I am to be married against my will to Vincent Hargrove. My father gambled away our ranch and promised me in marriage to settle the debt." She watched Yates's expression darken. "Vincent Hargrove, I know of him. He has a reputation for being ruthless in business and cruel in his personal affairs." "Yes," Theresa said, relief flooding through her that he understood the gravity of her situation. "I am desperate. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but my friend thought you might be willing to help me somehow. If you cannot, I understand, but I had to try." Yates was silent for a long moment, his gray eyes studying her face. Then he said, "Sit down, tell me everything." She sat on the single chair in the room while he sat on the edge of the bed, and she told him the whole story. The years since her mother's death, watching her father descend into grief and gambling. The mounting debts she had not known about until it was too late. The contract her father had signed, giving Vincent Hargrove ownership of the ranch and her hand in marriage. The wedding that was now just 2 days away. When she finished, Yates stood and walked to the window, looking out at the darkening street. "Your father signed a contract," he said slowly. "That makes this complicated. If I simply took you away, Hargrove could pursue us legally. He has money and influence. We would be fugitives." "I know," Theresa said, her brief hope already fading. "It was foolish of me to come here. I am sorry to have troubled you." "I did not say I would not help you," Yates said, turning to face her. "I just need to think this through carefully." He paused. "Why did your friend think I would be willing to help?" "She must have told you I asked about you, but that hardly obligates me to risk everything for a woman I have spoken to once." Theresa felt her cheeks flush. "I think Clara is a romantic. She hoped that you might have some interest in me beyond casual curiosity." I told her it was unlikely, but I was desperate enough to grasp at any possibility. Yates crossed the room and knelt in front of her chair, bringing his eyes level with hers. The intimacy of the gesture made her breath catch. "Your friend was not entirely wrong," he said softly. "I have thought about you many times since I saw you that day. There was something about the kindness in your eyes, the way you carried yourself with dignity despite the worn dress and the tired horse. I am a simple cowboy, Miss Zimmerman. I have little to offer beyond hard work and an honest heart. But if you are willing to trust me, I will find a way to free you from this forced marriage." Theresa felt tears spring to her eyes, but this time they were tears of hope rather than despair. "Why would you do this for me? You do not know me." "Maybe I want the chance to know you," Yates said. "And maybe I cannot stand by and watch an innocent woman be sold to a cruel man like livestock." He stood and began pacing, his mind clearly working through possibilities. "The wedding is in 2 days. That gives us very little time. We need to either break the contract legally or get you far enough away that Hargrove cannot reach you." "How can we break the contract legally?" Theresa asked. "My father signed it willingly, even if I did not consent." "Your consent might matter more than you think," Yates said. Texas law requires both parties to consent to marriage. If you refuse at the altar, the reverend cannot legally perform the ceremony. But that does not solve the debt problem, Theresa pointed out. My father will still lose the ranch and Hargrove will be furious. He might retaliate. Yates nodded. Then we need money. How much does your father owe? $3,000, Theresa said. It was an enormous sum, more money than she could imagine having at once. Yates whistled low. That is substantial. I have about 500 saved from the last few drives. Not nearly enough, he thought for a moment. But I know people. Cowboys I have worked with over the years, men who owe me favors. If I can get word out quickly enough, I might be able to pull together the money. That would take too long, Theresa said, though she was moved by his willingness to even try. The wedding is in 2 days. Then we go with the other option, Yates said decisively. We run. Tonight I have a good horse and I know these trails better than most. We can make it to Fort Davis by tomorrow night if we ride hard. From there, we can get a stage to San Antonio, maybe even further east. Theresa's mind reeled. You are talking about completely upending your life for someone you barely know. I am talking about doing what is right, Yates said firmly, and about taking a chance on something that has been in my thoughts for months. I am 26 years old, Miss Zimmerman. I have spent my life drifting from job to job, never putting down roots. When I saw you that day, something shifted in me. I started thinking about what it might be like to have a home, a wife, a real life instead of just an existence. He moved closer to her. I am not asking you to marry me right now or even to promise me anything. I am just asking you to trust me enough to let me get you to safety. After that, you can decide what you want to do. Theresa stood, her heart pounding. This was insane, running off into the night with a man she had just met. But it was also her only real chance at freedom. If I do this, my father will suffer the consequences. Hargrove will take everything. Your father made his choices, Yates said gently but firmly. He had no right to sell you to pay for his mistakes. You do not owe him your life and happiness. She knew he was right, but it still hurt. Despite everything, she loved her father. He had been a good man once before grief and weakness destroyed him, but she could not save him by sacrificing herself. All right, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I will go with you. Yates's face lit up with a smile that transformed his serious features. Go home and pack only what you can carry in a saddlebag. Change into riding clothes. Meet me at the old Cottonwood Grove 2 miles south of town in 2 hours. Can you do that without being seen? Yes, Theresa said. My father will be unconscious by now. He will not notice I am gone until morning. Good. We will have a substantial head start. Yates took her hand, his calloused fingers warm and strong around hers. I know this is frightening, but I promise you I will keep you safe. Theresa looked into his gray eyes and saw sincerity and determination. She barely knew this man, but every instinct told her to trust him. I believe you, she said softly. She left the hotel through the back stairs, her mind spinning with everything that had just happened. Clara was waiting for her, eyes wide with questions. What happened? Clara whispered. I am leaving tonight, Theresa said. Yates is taking me away from here. Do not tell anyone, not for at least a day. Please, Clara, I need time to get far from here. Clara hugged her tightly. Go, be happy. You deserve it. Theresa rode home through the darkness, her body thrumming with nervous energy. She felt like she was in a dream, everything moving too fast to fully comprehend. Just yesterday she had thought her life was over, and now she was planning to run away with a cowboy she barely knew. At home, she found her father passed out in his chair as expected, an empty bottle at his feet. She felt a pang of sadness looking at him, remembering the strong, capable man he had been when her mother was alive. But Yates was right. Her father had made his choices, and she could not let them destroy her. She went to her room and changed into her riding clothes, a simple split skirt and cotton blouse. She packed a saddlebag with a few changes of clothes, her mother's Bible and locket, and what little money she had saved. It was not much, the sum total of her life fitting into one small bag, but it would have to be enough. Before she left, she wrote her father a letter, even though she knew he did not deserve one. "Papa, I cannot marry Vincent Hargrove. I know this will bring consequences for you, and I am sorry for that, but I cannot pay for your debts with my life and future. I hope someday you will understand and forgive me. I hope even more that you will find the strength to overcome the weakness that has brought us to this point. I love you despite everything, Theresa." She left the letter on the kitchen table, saddled her horse, and rode out into the night. The moon was nearly full, providing enough light to see the trail. The desert was alive with the sounds of night creatures, and the air was finally cool after the scorching heat of the day. The Cottonwood Grove was a small oasis fed by a spring, a place she had played as a child. Yates was already there, waiting with his horse, a powerful buckskin stallion that looked built for endurance. He had an extra canteen of water and additional supplies tied to his saddle. "Ready?" he asked as she approached. "As ready as I will ever be," Theresa said. "Then let us ride," Yates said. "We have a long night ahead of us." They set off south, following trails that Yates seemed to know by instinct. They rode hard but not recklessly, mindful of the horses that would need to carry them many miles. Yates set a steady pace, occasionally slowing to rest the animals but never stopping for long. As they rode through the moonlit desert, Theresa found herself studying her companion. There was a quiet competence about Yates that she found reassuring. He sat his horse like he was born to it, constantly scanning the landscape, aware of every shadow and sound. This was a man who had spent years surviving in harsh conditions, and that experience showed in every movement. "Tell me about yourself," Theresa said during one of their brief walking breaks to rest the horses. "Where are you from originally?" "Missouri," Yates said. "My family had a farm near Independence. I left when I was 16 after my parents died of fever. Had a younger sister, but she went to live with our aunt in St. Louis. I headed west, worked whatever jobs I could find. Been cowboying for about 10 years now." "Do you ever see your sister?" "Not in years," Yates admitted. "I send her letters when I can, money when I have extra. But we have grown apart. She has a life back east that I do not really fit into." "That must be lonely," Theresa said softly. Yates glanced at her, and in the moonlight she saw a flicker of vulnerability in his expression. "It is. That is part of why I have been thinking about settling down, finding a place to belong. A man can only drift for so long before it starts to wear on his soul." They remounted and continued riding. As the night wore on, Theresa found herself growing more tired, but she refused to complain. Yates must be equally exhausted, but he showed no signs of slowing down. She understood the urgency. When her absence was discovered, Vincent Hargrove would almost certainly send men after them. Dawn was breaking when they finally stopped to rest properly, finding shelter in a rocky outcropping that provided shade and concealment. Yates helped her down from her horse, and she nearly collapsed, her legs shaky from hours in the saddle. "Easy," Yates said, steadying her with strong hands on her waist. "You did well. Many people could not have kept that pace all night." "How much further to Fort Davis?" Theresa asked, gratefully accepting the water he offered. "If we rest a few hours, then push hard this afternoon and evening, we should make it by midnight," Yates said. "The horses need rest as much as we do." He saw to the animals first, removing their saddles and rubbing them down, making sure they had water and what little grazing was available among the rocks. Theresa watched him work, noticing the care he took, the gentleness in his hands despite their strength. "You can sleep," Yates said when he finished. "I will keep watch." "You need rest too," Theresa protested. "I will rest after you have had a few hours," Yates said. "I am used to getting by on little sleep." Theresa wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling at her. She found a relatively comfortable spot among the rocks, using her saddlebag as a pillow. She expected to lie awake, her mind too full of worry and uncertainty to rest, but exhaustion claimed her almost immediately. She woke to the sensation of someone gently shaking her shoulder. Her eyes flew open and she found Yates kneeling beside her, his finger to his lips in a gesture for silence. Her heart leaped into her throat. Something was wrong. Yates pointed toward the trail they had left, and Theresa's blood ran cold. In the distance, she could see dust rising from multiple horses moving fast in their direction. Even from this distance, she could count at least 6 riders. "Hargrove's men," she whispered. Yates nodded grimly. "They are tracking us. We have maybe 20 minutes before they reach this area." "What do we do?" Theresa asked, fighting down panic. Yates was already moving, quickly saddling the horses. "There is a canyon about a mile east of here. It is rough terrain, hard on the horses, but it splits into multiple paths. If we can reach it before they see us, we might be able to lose them." They mounted quickly and rode hard, angling away from the approaching riders. Theresa's body ached from the previous night's ride, but adrenaline pushed the discomfort aside. They had almost reached the canyon entrance when a shout echoed across the desert behind them. "They have seen us," Yates said. "Ride hard." They plunged into the canyon, and Theresa saw what Yates meant about rough terrain. The path was narrow and rocky, winding between high stone walls. Their horses had to pick their way carefully, and speed became impossible. But the same was true for their pursuers. The canyon split ahead, and Yates took the left fork without hesitation. They rode deeper into the maze of stone passages, the walls rising higher on either side, blocking out much of the sunlight. Behind them, Theresa could hear the echo of pursuing hoofbeats and shouting voices. Yates led them through turn after turn, clearly familiar with this terrain. Finally, he guided them into a narrow side passage, barely wide enough for the horses. They pressed deep into the cleft in the rock, and Yates dismounted, motioning for Theresa to do the same. He moved to the front of the passage and peered out carefully. Theresa held her breath, trying to keep her horse quiet. She could hear the pursuers getting closer, their voices echoing off the canyon walls. "This way! I saw them go this way!" Someone shouted. "No, they went left at the fork." Another voice argued. The sounds of debate and confusion continued for several tense minutes. Then gradually, the voices faded as the group split up to search different paths. Yates remained motionless, watching and listening. After what felt like an eternity, he finally relaxed slightly and turned back to Theresa. "I think they have moved past us," he said quietly. "But we need to stay here for a while longer to be sure." Theresa sagged against the rock wall, her heart still pounding. "That was too close." "Hargrove must have discovered your absence earlier than we hoped," Yates said. "He sent out a large search party immediately." "They will keep looking," Theresa said. "Vincent Hargrove does not give up easily on something he considers his property." Yates's jaw tightened. "You are not property, and I will not let him take you." They waited in the narrow passage for over an hour before Yates deemed it safe to move. When they emerged, he led them through the canyon system by a completely different route, one that eventually brought them out on the far eastern side, miles from where they had entered. "This will add time to our journey," Yates explained as they rode across open desert again. But it should throw them off our trail. They will expect us to head straight for Fort Davis. Where are we going instead? Theresa asked. There is a small settlement about 15 miles northeast of here. Just a few families, a trading post. We can rest the horses there, get supplies, and then circle back toward Fort Davis from a different direction. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as they rode. Theresa's lips cracked from the dry air, and despite the water Yates rationed carefully, she felt constantly thirsty. But she did not complain. Yates was suffering the same conditions while trying to keep them both safe. They reached the settlement as the sun was setting. It was even smaller than Yates had suggested, just 3 buildings clustered around a well. The trading post was run by an elderly Mexican couple, and Yates spoke to them in fluent Spanish, explaining that they needed to rest their horses and purchase supplies. The woman, whose name was Senora Martinez, looked at Theresa with knowing eyes. "You are running from something," she said in accented English. Theresa hesitated, but Yates answered honestly. She was to be forced into marriage with a cruel man. We are trying to reach safety. Senora Martinez nodded. Love is worth fighting for. Come, I will prepare food while your horses rest. Inside the trading post, which doubled as the couple's home, Theresa finally had a chance to wash the dust from her face and hands. Senora Martinez provided a simple but delicious meal of beans, tortillas, and roasted peppers. As they ate, Yates discussed the trail ahead with Senor Martinez, getting information about routes and potential dangers. "The men who are chasing you, they are dangerous?" Senor Martinez asked. "Yes," Yates said. "They work for a powerful man who is not accustomed to being defied." "Then you should not go to Fort Davis," the old man said firmly. "It is too obvious. They will have men watching there. You should go south instead, cross the Rio Grande into Mexico. I have family in Ojinaga who would shelter you until the pursuit dies down." Yates considered this. "That might be wiser. What do you think?" he asked Theresa. She was touched that he was including her in the decision. "If we go to Mexico, how would we ever come back? Would we be fugitives forever?" "Not necessarily," Senor Martinez said. "This man, he can only chase you if he knows where you are. In Mexico, you could wait, perhaps send word to authorities about the nature of the forced marriage. There are lawyers, even in these wild places, who might help. Or we could simply start new lives there," Yates said quietly, looking at Theresa. "If that is what you wanted." Theresa thought about this. Mexico was foreign territory, a place she had never been. But staying in Texas meant always looking over her shoulder, waiting for Vincent Hargrove to find her. "Let us go to Mexico," she decided. "At least for now, until we can determine if there is a legal way to resolve this." Yates nodded. "Then we will need a guide. The river crossing can be treacherous, and I am not familiar with the territory on the other side." "My grandson can guide you," Senora Martinez said. "He knows all the safe crossings and the trails to Ojinaga. He can leave with you in the morning." They spent the night in the trading post, Theresa sleeping on a cot in a small back room while Yates kept watch outside. Despite her exhaustion, she found it hard to sleep. Her entire life had been turned upside down in less than 48 hours. She had gone from resigned despair to desperate flight to this strange limbo, dependent on the kindness of strangers and the protection of a man she barely knew. Yet, when she thought about Yates, she felt something more than mere gratitude. There was a strength in him, but also a gentleness that touched her. The way he had knelt before her in that hotel room, promising to help. The care he took with the horses. The respect he showed her, always asking her opinion, never assuming he had the right to make all decisions. She thought about his words, about having spent months thinking of her. It seemed incredible that a brief glimpse of her in town could have made such an impression. But she was beginning to understand that Yates was a man who felt things deeply, even if he showed it quietly. Morning came too quickly. The grandson, a young man named Miguel who could not have been more than 18, arrived with the dawn. He had 2 spare horses loaded with supplies and a confident manner that suggested he had made this journey many times. "The river is running fast from mountain rains," Miguel told them as they prepared to leave. "But I know a good place to cross. We should reach it by afternoon." Señora Martinez pressed food into Teresa's hands and spoke rapid Spanish to Yates, who nodded solemnly. When the old woman turned to Theresa, she took both her hands and said, "May God protect you and bring you happiness, child. You have a good man here. Do not let him go." Theresa felt her cheeks warm, but she thanked the woman sincerely. They set out with Miguel leading the way, following trails that wound through increasingly rugged country. The landscape was breathtaking in its harsh beauty, all red rock and sparse vegetation, with mountains rising in the distance. As they rode, Miguel entertained them with stories of the area, pointing out landmarks and sharing local legends. He seemed to sense that Theresa and Yates needed some lightness after their tense flight, and his cheerful chatter helped ease the strain. By mid-afternoon, they reached the Rio Grande. The river was indeed running fast and high, swollen with distant rain. Miguel studied the water carefully before leading them upstream to where the river widened and, he assured them, became shallower. "We must cross here," Miguel said. "Stay close behind me and trust your horses. They will find their footing." The crossing was nerve-wracking. The water came up to the horses' chests, and the current pulled at them strongly. Theresa gripped her saddle horn and focused on keeping her seat as her horse struggled against the flow. Yates stayed close beside her, ready to help if she got into trouble. They made it across, emerging dripping and cold but safe on the Mexican side of the river. Miguel led them into a landscape that looked much the same as what they had left, but somehow felt different, foreign, and full of unknown possibilities. "We will reach Ojinaga by tomorrow evening," Miguel said. "Tonight we will camp in the hills. There is a place I know with good shelter and water." That night, camping under the stars, Theresa finally had a chance to truly talk with Yates. Miguel had discreetly moved away to check on the horses, giving them privacy. "How are you holding up?" Yates asked, sitting beside her near the small fire. "I am exhausted and scared and uncertain about everything," Theresa admitted. "But I am also grateful. You gave up your work, your plans, everything to help me. I do not know how I can ever repay that." "I do not want repayment," Yates said. "I want to know that you are safe and free to choose your own path." He paused, staring into the fire. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "If circumstances were different, if we had met in a normal way without all this danger and running, would you have been interested in me? Or am I just a means of escape?" Theresa was quiet for a moment, considering her answer carefully. "A few days ago, I would not have been able to answer that. I did not know you. But these past 2 days, seeing how you handle yourself, how you treat me with respect, how you are kind even to the horses, I have come to admire you greatly." She turned to look at him directly. "I cannot say if that is love or just the intensity of our situation. But I would like the chance to find out if you are willing to give me that time." Yates smiled, and it transformed his weathered face. "I would like that very much, and there is no rush. We have all the time we need to figure out what this is between us." He reached out and took her hand, and Theresa felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the fire. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the vast desert sky. The next day, they reached Ojinaga, a small town on the Mexican side of the river. Miguel led them to a modest home where his great-uncle lived, a dignified older man named Don Fernando. After Miguel explained their situation, Don Fernando welcomed them graciously. "You will stay here as long as you need," he said in careful English. "My home is your home." Miguel prepared to return to his grandparents, and Theresa thanked him with genuine warmth. "You helped save my life," she told the young man. Miguel grinned. "It was an adventure. May you have many happy years together, Señor and Señora." After he left, Theresa realized that everyone they had met assumed she and Yates were married or soon to be. She supposed it made sense. An unmarried woman fleeing with a man would raise questions, while a married couple seeking refuge was more straightforward. Don Fernando showed them to a guest room, and Theresa felt her face grow hot when she realized there was only one bed. Yates must have noticed her discomfort because he immediately said, "I will sleep on the floor. You take the bed." "We are not going to have you sleep on the floor," Theresa protested. "The bed is large enough that we can share it modestly." That night, they lay on opposite sides of the bed, a careful space between them. Theresa was intensely aware of Yates's presence, the sound of his breathing, the warmth radiating from his body. She had never shared a bed with a man before, and it was both strange and oddly comforting. "Theresa," Yates's voice came softly through the darkness. "Yes." "I want you to know that I will never do anything you do not want. I will never take advantage of this situation or expect anything from you. You are safe with me." Tears stung Theresa's eyes at the sincerity in his voice. "I know," she whispered. "I trust you, Yates, completely." They settled into life in Ojinaga over the following weeks. Don Fernando had connections throughout the region and assured them that he would hear if anyone came looking for them. Meanwhile, Yates found work helping with cattle on a nearby ranch, and Theresa assisted Don Fernando's daughter with her small shop in town. The days took on a peaceful rhythm that felt almost surreal after the chaos of their flight. Theresa and Yates spent their evenings together, talking for hours, learning about each other's lives, hopes, and dreams. The connection between them deepened with each passing day. One evening, about 3 weeks after their arrival, they walked together along the river at sunset. The water ran more calmly here than at the crossing point, reflecting the orange and pink sky. "I received word today," Yates said. "A friend I contacted in Presidio sent a message through Don Fernando's network. Vincent Hargrove is still looking for you, but the search has shifted north. He thinks we went to New Mexico." "That is good news," Theresa said, though she felt a chill at the mention of Hargrove's name. "There is more," Yates continued. "Apparently your father has been causing a scene, claiming he was coerced into signing the contract. He has been trying to get the agreement nullified, but Hargrove is not budging. The ranch is now fully in Hargrove's possession." Theresa felt a pang of sadness for her father, but it was dulled by distance and time. "He brought it on himself. I cannot save him from his own choices." "My friend also said there is talk in town about us. Most people are on our side, believe it or not. They are glad you got away from Hargrove. The Reverend has been particularly vocal about the injustice of forced marriages." They walked in silence for a while, and then Yates stopped and turned to face her. The setting sun cast a golden glow over his features, and Theresa thought she had never seen him look more handsome. "These past weeks with you have been the happiest of my life," Yates said. "I know we came together under strange circumstances, but what I feel for you is real and deep. I am in love with you, Theresa." Theresa's heart swelled. She had known for days that her feelings had moved beyond gratitude or admiration into something far deeper. "I love you too," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I think I have been falling in love with you since that first night in the hotel room when you promised to help me." Yates pulled her close, and for a moment they just held each other. Then he tilted her face up and kissed her gently. It was Theresa's first real kiss, and it was everything she had ever dreamed it could be, tender and passionate and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "Marry me," Yates said. "Not because you have to, not to maintain appearances, but because you want to build a life with me. I know I am just a cowboy with little to offer, but I will work hard every day to make you happy. I will respect you and cherish you and never give you cause to regret choosing me." "Yes," Theresa said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married a week later in a small Catholic church in Ojinaga with Don Fernando and his family as witnesses. Theresa wore a simple white dress that Don Fernando's daughter had made for her, and Yates wore his best clothes, his hair neatly combed. The priest spoke in Spanish, and though Theresa did not understand all the words, she understood the meaning. She was binding her life to this good man who had saved her and won her heart. That night, in the privacy of their room, Theresa and Yates consummated their marriage. Yates was patient and gentle, making sure Theresa felt comfortable and loved. The intimacy between them was beautiful and profound, a physical expression of the emotional bond they had formed. In the months that followed, they built a life together in Mexico. Yates's skill with horses and cattle made him valuable to local ranchers, and Theresa's kindness and willingness to learn endeared her to the community. They saved money carefully, planning for a future that felt more real with each passing day. But Mexico, while safe, was not truly home for either of them. They both felt the pull of the land north of the Rio Grande, the desire to return to the United States without fear of persecution. Nearly 6 months after their flight from Presidio, they received news that changed everything. A letter arrived through Don Fernando's network from Reverend Mills in Presidio. Vincent Hargrove had been arrested for murder. Apparently, a young woman who worked in his household had died under suspicious circumstances, and this time there were witnesses who testified that Hargrove had beaten her in a rage. The evidence was overwhelming, and Hargrove was currently awaiting trial. With his arrest, his business empire was crumbling, and all his contracts were being reviewed by the courts. The Reverend wrote that the forced marriage contract between Hargrove and Theresa had been nullified as part of this process. The ranch, while still technically under Hargrove's ownership, would likely be seized and sold to pay his legal debts and any judgments against him. But Theresa was free, legally and completely free. "We can go home," Theresa said, reading the letter with trembling hands. Yates wrapped his arms around her. "Where do you want to go? Back to Presidio?" Somewhere new, Theresa thought about this. Presidio held memories both good and bad, but it was also where her mother was buried, where her roots were. "I want to see my father," she said. "I need to know that he is all right. After that, I do not know." They made preparations to return to Texas. Don Fernando was sad to see them go but understood. "You will always have family here if you need it," he told them. The journey back across the Rio Grande felt different than the desperate flight south had been. This time they traveled openly, without fear, as a married couple returning home. When they reached Presidio, Theresa's heart clenched at the familiar sights. They went first to what had been her family's ranch. It was empty and showing signs of neglect, but it was still standing. Theresa walked through the house where she had grown up, touching familiar objects, remembering better times. "We could buy this place," Yates said, "if you wanted to. Make it a real home again." "Let us see my father first," Theresa said. They found her father living in a small room above the saloon, working odd jobs to pay for his board. When Theresa knocked on his door and he opened it to see her standing there, his face crumpled. "Theresa," he whispered, "I am so sorry. I am so desperately sorry for what I did to you." She saw that he was sober, his eyes clear for perhaps the first time in years. The news about Hargrove and the consequences that had followed seemed to have shocked him into clarity. "Papa," she said, and despite everything, she embraced him. They talked for hours. Her father explained that the shock of her disappearance and the revelation of what kind of man Hargrove truly was had forced him to confront his own actions. He had stopped drinking, started working, trying to make amends in whatever small ways he could. "I do not expect your forgiveness," he said. "What I did was unforgivable, but I want you to know that I am trying to be better, to be the man your mother would have wanted me to be." Theresa introduced him to Yates, and her father shook the cowboy's hand with genuine gratitude. "Thank you for protecting my daughter when I failed her." Over the following weeks, they worked out an arrangement. The ranch was indeed being sold by the courts to settle Hargrove's debts. Yates used all their savings and borrowed additional money to purchase it. Theresa's father, sober and determined to make amends, came to work for them, helping to rebuild what he had nearly destroyed. It was hard at first, rebuilding trust and creating a new dynamic. But Theresa saw that her father's transformation was genuine. He threw himself into the work of repairing the ranch with an energy she had not seen in years. And true to his word, he stayed sober. Meanwhile, Vincent Hargrove was convicted of murder and sentenced to hang. Theresa felt no joy at the news, only relief that he could never hurt anyone else. She attended his execution not out of vengeance, but to close that chapter of her life completely. Yates stood beside her, his hand in hers, a reminder of how far they had come. With Hargrove gone and the ranch thriving again, Theresa and Yates settled into married life. They expanded the cattle operation, hired a few cowboys to help with the work, and became respected members of the Presidio community. Theresa rekindled her friendship with Clara, and Yates formed bonds with other ranchers in the area. A year after their wedding, Theresa gave birth to their first child, a son they named William. Yates was a devoted father, gentle and patient with the baby. Watching him cradle their son, Theresa felt her heart overflow with love for the man who had risked everything to save her. 2 years later, a daughter arrived, whom they named Grace. Then another son, then another daughter. The house filled with the sounds of children's laughter, something it had not heard since Theresa's own childhood. Theresa's father, now in his 50s and finally free of his demons, became a doting grandfather. The children adored him, and he poured into them all the love and attention he had failed to give Theresa in her later years. It was not the same as having had that love when she needed it, but it was healing in its own way. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Yates and Theresa rode out to the spot by the Rio Grande where he had first told her he loved her. The river ran peacefully, reflecting the blue Texas sky. "You ever regret it?" Yates asked. "Tying yourself to a simple cowboy, spending your life on a dusty ranch." Theresa turned to him. This man who had ridden through the night to stop her forced marriage, who had protected her and loved her and built a life with her. His face was more weathered now, with lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun, but to her he was as handsome as ever. "Not for a single moment," she said firmly. "You gave me freedom when I had none. You gave me love when I thought it was lost to me forever. You gave me a family and a home and a life worth living. How could I ever regret that?" Yates smiled and pulled her close. "I was the one who was saved, Theresa. Before you, I was just drifting through life with no purpose. You gave me a reason to put down roots to build something lasting. Every day with you has been a gift." They kissed as the sun set over the desert, the same desert where they had fled together a decade ago. So much had changed since that desperate night, but the love between them had only grown stronger. Their children grew up strong and healthy, raised with the values of hard work and kindness that their parents embodied. William showed a natural talent with horses and eventually took over much of the ranch operations. Grace inherited her mother's compassion and became a teacher in Presidio. The younger children found their own paths, but all remained close to the family. Theresa's father lived to see all his grandchildren grown, and when he passed peacefully in his sleep at 70, it was with the knowledge that he had made amends for his mistakes and earned his daughter's forgiveness. Yates and Theresa grew old together, their love maturing into something even deeper and richer than the passion of their youth. They sat on their porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the land they had built together, often holding hands like young lovers. "Tell us again how you met," their grandchildren would beg when they visited, and Theresa would smile and begin the story. "Your grandfather rode through the night to stop a terrible injustice," she would say. "And in doing so, he gave me the greatest gift anyone could give, the freedom to choose my own path. I chose him, and I have never regretted that choice." Yates would squeeze her hand and add, "And I chose her, the kindest, bravest woman I ever knew. The moment I saw her give a peppermint stick to a crying child, I knew she was special. I just had to convince her to give a simple cowboy a chance." "You were never simple," Theresa would correct him gently. "You were extraordinary, and you still are." They lived well into their 70s, rare for people of their time and place. When Yates finally passed, it was quietly in the bed he had shared with Theresa for over 50 years. She held his hand as he drew his last breath, and though her heart broke, she was grateful for every moment they had shared. Theresa lived a few more years, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of them the legacy of a love that had begun with a desperate flight into the night. She spent her final days in the house Yates had bought for her, looking at the pictures on the walls documenting a life well lived. When her time came, her family gathered around her. "Do not be sad," she told them with her last strength. "I am going to be with your grandfather again. We will ride together through the stars, just as we rode through the desert all those years ago." She closed her eyes and slipped away peacefully, a smile on her weathered face. Those who loved her said she looked younger in death, as if the years had fallen away, leaving the beautiful young woman who had once trusted a cowboy to save her. The ranch remained in the family for generations, each inheriting not just the land, but the story of how it had been saved and rebuilt. Theresa and Yates were buried side by side in the small cemetery near the house, their graves marked with simple stones that bore their names and the words, "Beloved partners in life and love." Visitors to Presidio still tell the story of the cowboy who rode through the night to stop a forced marriage, and the brave woman who had the courage to run. It became a local legend, embellished over the years but never losing its essential truth. That love, when it is real and brave, can overcome even the darkest circumstances. In the end, what began as a desperate escape became a testament to the power of choosing one's own destiny. Theresa had been promised to another man, a cruel man who would have destroyed her. But Yates Irving had ridden through the night to stop it, and in doing so had not just saved her life but given her a love story worth living. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren carried forward the values they had instilled: courage in the face of injustice, compassion for those in need, and the unwavering belief that love freely chosen is worth any risk. The ranch they built together stood as a monument to those values, a place where family gathered and stories were told, and the legacy of two people who had found each other against all odds continued to inspire. And sometimes, on clear desert nights, people claimed they could see two figures on horseback, riding together across the moonlit landscape, forever young, forever free, forever in love. Whether it was true or just a romantic fancy, no one could say for certain. But the story of Theresa Zimmerman and Yates Irving lived on, a reminder that even in the harsh and unforgiving landscape of the Wild West, love could bloom and flourish and create something beautiful that would last long after the lovers themselves had passed into legend.